Welcome to This Organized Life. If you're a mom, wife, or coffee lover seeking advice on how to reduce clutter and reclaim time, look no further than your host, Lori Palau, founder of Simply Be Organized and author of Hot Mess, a practical guide to getting organized. For a lot of people, clutter is their dirty little secret, but it doesn't have to be. Each week, we will share practical tips, chat with experts, and provide strategies on how to keep you organized. I hope that by sharing our stories, you feel a little less alone and more empowered to tackle the areas that are holding you back. So let's get started.
Hi, everybody, and welcome to today's episode of This Organized Life podcast. I am your host, Lori Palau, and I am really jazzed for this episode. So people that are in this space, people that have been in the organizing space, whether you're a professional organizer or you follow influencers, for lack of a better word, some of those pioneers, those OG people that have been in this industry, you're going to know today's guest. And if you are new to this industry and you don't know, well, you are absolutely in for a treat. So joining me today is Joshua Becker. Now, many of you might know Joshua because he is the founder of and CEO of his really uber popular website called Becoming Minimalist. He's got millions of followers, subscribers that read his blog daily, weekly. He's also a best-selling author of 5 books, and his most recent book, Things That Matter, came out back in April. But you also might be familiar with The Minimalist Home or The More of Less, just some of his other really popular titles. He's also the founder of 2 magazines that are called, and if I want to make sure I get them correct, the creator of Simplify Magazine and Simple Money Magazine, which you all know I'm all about, like simplifying all aspects of your life. And in his spare time, he runs a nonprofit because why not? And I can't wait to talk about that too, because you guys know that philanthropy is a really big part of my life. And on a personal note, married to his wife, 2 teenage kids, right? 2, I think 2. And they live in Arizona. And I reached out to him and I said, hey, I would love to have you on as a guest on our show. And graciously, he said yes. So I am very excited to share today's guest with you, my new friend, Joshua Becker. Welcome, Joshua, to the show.
Well, you are very kind. You are very kind. Although the longer the bio gets, the older I feel like I sound. So
I know, but it's all the accomplishments.
Or maybe it's my gray hair. Maybe it's my gray hair that's making me
it's
feel
the
old.
but you are like my husband, Joshua, with the distinguished gray hair. It's like annoying. Yeah. Mine, I have to cover every 4 weeks. Yours, it just makes you look more handsome. Not to flatter you, but
thank you.
All right. So I gave our listeners top line, bio, all the accolades, but tell in your own words a little bit about who you are. What's your story? We can kind of go back from there.
Sure. My story. Me and my wife, we've been married 23 years. My children are 19 and 16, a junior in high school and a sophomore in college. So still a little bit new to this new stage of life of empty nest. That also makes me feel old. I grew up in the Midwest, South Dakota, went to college in Omaha. Out of college, I was a pastor for 15 years in Wisconsin and Vermont. And now, of course, we live in Arizona. We've been here for the last 11 or 12 years, something like that.
I was like, you went from the cold, hello, Wisconsin and Vermont, to now living in Arizona.
Yeah. My wife hates the cold. So it was her desire to get out of the cold. So when the opportunity came up, we moved, and we've been here ever since and like it very much.
Smart move. Just as a quick side note, I have a little bit of experience with the empty nesting. I have a 19 and a 21, almost 22-year-old. So
all right.
I kind of like it. I'm not going to lie. Like it's a weird adjustment, but we've been married 24 years. So we're like kind of similar seasons of life. And
I'll say.
Yeah. So
wonderful.
Anyway, just side note. Okay. So I know a little bit about you and kind of a little bit about your story in your journey into minimalism, which started, if I'm not mistaken, around 14 years ago. And tell us a little bit about that. How did that come about? You know, you're living your life. You've got small kids at the time. You were a pastor at the time when this all craziness happened. And again, the world of organization, minimalism, all of that looked very different. Yeah. How did that enter your world, and what did that look like?
Yeah. I hope I changed it for the good. I hope I changed it.
Oh my gosh, you totally did.
It's interesting. So I always say I lived my entire life pretty squarely in the middle class, never missing a meal, but never eating at the finest restaurants either. Like just pretty squarely in the middle class. Like I said, I worked at churches, and so was never making a huge income, but enough to get by, living paycheck to paycheck. But somehow, despite that relatively modest income, I still ended up collecting quite a bit of stuff. And we had 3 different pay increases over the first 10 years of our married life. And every time I got a pay increase, it seemed like we would be able to get ahead financially, but we never were. It's like the more money came in, the more money just went out. And so anyway, we're living in Vermont, 4-bedroom, 2.5 bathroom house, older house in Vermont. And Saturday morning, Memorial Day weekend, I went out to clean the garage. My son was 5, and I had this vision of my son helping me clean out the garage, but he lasted about 30 seconds. And I'm just in the garage after the long winter, and hours are passing. Like one thing leads to another, and another project. Anyway, my neighbor happens to be outside. Her name is June. She's doing all of her yard work. And I happened to strike up a conversation with her. I was complaining about how long my garage project was lasting. She was complaining about how long her yard work was taking, and how our entire Saturday was being taken up by taking care of stuff. And she changed my life in one sentence. She said, you know, that's why my daughter's a minimalist. She keeps telling me I don't need to own all this stuff. And I had never heard the word minimalist before, but man, I looked at the pile of things in my driveway that dirty and dusty and didn't mean anything to me. And there's my son in the backyard swinging alone on the swing set where he'd been all day. And it was just this light bulb moment of realizing that my things weren't making me happy, but even worse, all the things I owned were actually taking me away from the things that did bring me happiness in life and meaning and purpose. Almost as if all the things I owned were actually keeping me from the life I wish I was living instead. And so that was the moment that we discovered minimalism, and that was the moment that we were in.
Now, what's your wife's name?
Kim.
Okay. So you go in and you tell Kim this story, and and what is her reaction? Because again, you have a 5-year-old, and there's stuff.
2-year-old,
and a 5-year-old and a 2, and you're like, did she think you were nuts? Like, what did that look like?
I often go back and I wonder if I had this conversation on a different day, if the reaction would have been different. But I was outside cleaning the garage all morning into the early afternoon. My wife was doing the spring cleaning inside all morning into the early afternoon. She was probably on her 3rd bathroom, the 3rd toilet that she was scrubbing at the time, with my 2-year-old, tagging along and pulling at her pant leg the entire time. And so literally when I came in, she was in one of the bathrooms, and I'm like, you'll never guess what June just said. She said we don't have to own this stuff. That she used this word minimalism about owning less stuff, and she was like, that sounds pretty good right about now.
Yeah, as she's got her hands in the toilet, she's like, absolutely, sign me up.
Yeah. So I don't know. Maybe if it had been just a random conversation, she would have been as agreeable, but certainly at that moment, we were both pretty frustrated with the amount of time and energy that went into taking care of our stuff.
So this is a question that always fascinates me. And we were just talking before we hit record, we had dropped our 300th episode with Eve Rodsky, who wrote the book Fair Play and turned into a documentary. And I'm going to ask you a similar question, which is, you could have easily done this within your family. You could have tried this new experiment or tried this new way of life, but you decided to open it up. And I guess at the time it was just the blog. I'll allow you to, correct me if I'm wrong, but you invited the world to kind of walk alongside you on this and share it. And I'm curious what made you decide to do that. And I'm sure you had no idea how it would blow up and the movement that it would create. Yeah. I'm just wondering why you felt called to kind of put it out there as opposed to just say, this is something we're going to do.
Yeah. I'd always kind of liked the idea of writing, although I had never really written anything other than little things for my job. I had maybe started a blog once or twice before about, I don't know, things I was learning in life, and I'd post once or twice and nothing would ever happen of it. But actually, the longer conversation is my mom was really worried because if I recall the story correctly, she had seen some minimalists on Oprah and they were digging food out of dumpsters. And she was pretty worried when I used the word, which was probably a pretty good summary of what the word meant 15 years ago. But I started the blog mainly because I just wanted a diary. I wanted a journal. I wanted a place where I could write down what we were getting rid of and what we were keeping. And literally my first post, I think, was that Monday. So Monday was Memorial Day. And so I was off that day and probably that evening. I'm like, I just had this conversation with my neighbor and I'm going to use this place to write about what we're getting rid of and what we're keeping. And there were people using the word minimalism back then. I think I was the first website entirely dedicated to minimalism, and now they're all over the place, which is wonderful. But there were people writing about it and talking about it in other contexts, and usually pretty extreme, trying to own 100 things or trying to own 15 things or moving into a tiny home. And so my approach was never that way. I liked my job. We weren't going to move from the house that we were in. I didn't want to get down to 100 things. We had 3 different small groups that were meeting in our living room over the course of a week. And I was doing premarital counseling. And there were things that were pretty important to me that I wanted to keep doing. I just wanted to get rid of the stuff that was keeping me from doing the things that were important in my life. And so that became the blog, and I started writing about it. And I remember one person linked to it. Mandy was her name, and she was a blogger writing about, I don't know, simplifying the home or something. And she recommended my blog to her readers, and she used this phrase. She said, "I like the way Joshua talks about minimalism. It seems so rational." And I really jumped on that phrasing, and I thought to myself, I think that's what I'm describing, a pretty rational approach to minimalism, where the goal isn't to just own a duffel bag full of stuff, but the goal is to think through, what do I want to accomplish with my life? What do I need to keep in order to do that? And then what are all the other things that I've accumulated or that I'm chasing that's actually distracting me from those more important values?
I love that on so many levels. And you basically answered the question, because one of the things I was going to say was there's such a spectrum, again, of what minimalism is. And, I think we hear a word and we all conjure up an image in our mind of what that means. And I think for some people, when they hear the word minimalism, they think that basically you've got one fork in your house, and I like, again, how you are defining it. And I think you also touched on something else, because I like to I think for myself, I my book is called Hot Mess, A Practical Guide to Getting Organized. Because I think it comes down to what's practical, what's rational. But what I love about what you said is the goal wasn't, let me reduce to this X number. Like, that's not the goal. The goal is about having the stuff in your home that serves you and isn't a roadblock for you. And that goes back to what we were talking about earlier before we hit record, which is really all about the why, right? Why are you doing it? To say, I want to just get rid of stuff and I want to have, 10 things and I rotate them around throughout the month. That's great if that makes you happy, but why are you doing that? Like, that in and of itself isn't going to give you the fulfillment, but approaching it from the way that you were looking at it, that lens, hopefully was getting you closer to the goal to be able to spend your Saturday afternoon playing with your son as opposed to cleaning the garage.
Yeah. Yeah. The first step that I always have people do when we talk about owning less is I always have them finish this question. If finish this sentence, I desire to own less so that I can blank. Like, what's the bigger reason behind the decluttering? What's the bigger reason behind the minimizing of your stuff? I want to spend more time with my family. Well, owning fewer things will allow you to do that because you'll spend less time cleaning stuff. You'll spend less time shopping at the mall or on Amazon. You'll free up money to do things with your family. I want to retire early. Well, owning less stuff can help you get that. I want to travel more. I want to volunteer more. I want to give more. What is the bigger reason behind that? Because I want to declutter just to declutter only gets you so far, I think. I think you need to find the deeper motivation behind the life I want to be living is on the other side of making these steps and making these changes, and knowing what that is will be helpful. And it looks different for everybody. It looks different for everybody. I always define the difference between minimalism and decluttering. The words have become somewhat synonymous, and maybe there's some truth. I think most discovering minimalism involves decluttering. I usually think decluttering is getting rid of the things that you don't need. Minimalism is more about finding how little you actually need. I think minimalism forces us to challenge our assumptions a little bit more about, I know I don't need these things, but maybe there's even a better life available for you if you would get rid of even the things that you think you need to keep. At least that's what I discovered in my own life. But anyway,
no, I love that. I think that's really poignant. And as I get older, I find that I am absolutely leading a more minimalist life. Now, is that because I'm getting older and my kids are now out of the house? Is it because I've been doing this for over a decade? So the more you practice something, you continue to challenge yourself to go further. I don't know necessarily what that reason is, but I find decision fatigue is just exhausting. And so for me, I don't want to have to make a lot of choices. I feel like I spend my life making choices, whether it's in my business, whether it's, in my marriage with my grownish kids, whatever it is. I want to just I don't want getting dressed to be stressful. I don't want to look in my closet and see stuff that I'm not using or that I'm that's just distraction. So for me, that's part of what drives me, is because it's causing me more anxiety to have that. But I think it has to, like you said, you have to have that come from within, what that looks like for you. Now I'm curious, 2 little kids. Now, obviously they were little, so they were still at that stage where they're doing what they're told, so as they grew up, it was sort of a way of life for them. Yeah. But I'm just curious for people that are listening out there that might be going, yes, I want to adopt this, or I want to start incorporating this, but I have stuff with my kids. How did that kind of play in? Because it's easier when it's just you, but now you have the whole family on board.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. It's easier when it's just you. It's easier, a little bit harder when there's 2, a little bit harder when there's 4, a little bit harder when they're 6 or 8 or 10 or 12. And I think there's some just of accepting, hey, if there's 4 people under this roof, there's going to be more stuff than if there's just one person living under this roof. So some just realization of that. I don't know if it was intentional at the time or not, but it's my first advice always for people, and I think it's really important. It is unfair for you to listen to a podcast about decluttering. It's unfair for you to get inspired around this word minimalism or owning less, and you go home and make your kids go first, or you go home and make your spouse go first. It's just unfair for you to make them have to get rid of things until you've gotten rid of your own things. And the more you do it yourself, the more your kids are going to notice you doing it. You're going to set that example for them. The more you can explain to them why you're doing it, the more you can understand the emotions that are wrapped up into it, the more you discover solutions that worked for you, the better prepared you'll be when you have that conversation with your kids. I think the kids' things depends a lot on their age. Like you mentioned, 2 and 5, it's a lot easier to kind of set the culture of your home and set the expectations for how your kids are going to be and what they can have and what that's going to look like. When they're 16 or 17 or 18, if your kids have spent 17 years growing up in a certain household and a certain culture, and you get inspired to make a big change, it's probably unreasonable to assume that your daughter is going to be inspired around the exact same thing at age 17 that you're being inspired around. And so I just think it does get a little bit tougher the older they get, but I still think if they're under your roof, we can, still set an example, and there's still some practical things that we can put in place. But for my kids, our strategy was physical boundaries, setting physical boundaries for anything and everything. You can have as many toys as you want, as long as they fit in this closet, as long as they fit against this wall. You can have whatever shoes you want, as long as they fit in this shelving unit or in this closet. You can keep whatever arts and crafts you want, as long as they fit in this bin, in this box. I think it empowers them to make decisions about what to keep and what to get rid of. And it also, it becomes very obvious when it's time to make a change after Christmas, and it's been a couple weeks after Christmas and the toys don't fit in the closet anymore. And all right, let's give it a little time, and then let's decide which toys you're going to keep and which toys you're not. And the last thing it does, which I think is so important, is it just teaches kids the idea of boundaries. I mean, all of life is boundaries. We have limited money, we have limited time, we have limited energy, we have limited space, and all of life is deciding, what am I going to put into these limited boundaries that I have? What is the most important? What needs to go in first? And so I think that's a valuable lesson for kids to learn.
I could not agree more. And our longtime listeners are no stranger to me sharing that. Yeah. Now, we talk a lot about what I call different types of clutter, right? The physical clutter, obvious stuff that you see. I talk about calendar clutter, which comes from being what I define as being overscheduled and just not having the margin in your life to deal with the stuff. So it results in physical clutter. And then we talk about emotional clutter, which is the guilt, which is the fear, which is sentimental things, what people think of as not wanting to get rid of things. So I'm wondering how, in your kind of, again, minimalist approach to getting rid of things, because again, I can look at it, and I took a similar stance when my kids were younger about here's your space. So you have the choice of what goes in that space, but it's up to you. But I know I had one daughter in particular, my younger one, who definitely is my more emotional one, less tactical, and emotional clutter is a big deal for her. We've developed strategies over the years for her to kind of get rid of every stuffed animal has feelings. And I'm curious, from that approach, when you have these kind of black and white boundaries, how you navigate those types of when emotion comes into it, how that plays out, or what your advice would be to somebody when they hit that emotional roadblock.
For the parent, or I mean, for an adult, or for
I don't
a
know,
child?
for either one. I don't care. You pick your poison,
It is it's a tough one for sure. My first approach is always two things. Number one, let's not start with the things that stir up difficult emotions.
Totally.
Or maybe that's not the right word. I think there are some things. Well, let's not start with the hardest thing in your home that you would need to get rid of. And so let's start with the things that you you can part with, the stuff you don't need, the stuff you don't need, and then let's begin to see how that frees up your life in ways. Let's notice the benefits that come from making some of these changes, and let's use the positive changes that are happening in your life to help you overcome some of the emotional stuff that might surface with some of those other things. The second point is and again, no easy answers to this, and I don't work privately with people individually, so maybe I would come up with some more practical solutions here, or better examples. But I always encourage people to wrestle with, why is this so hard for me to get rid of? Like, what are the emotions that are tied up in this? I think a lot of people, when we're decluttering, we get to the things that's hard for us to get rid of, and like we just stop and we're like, oh, this is too hard for me to get rid of. This is just who I am. This is who I've always been. I'm never able to get rid of books. I'm never able to get rid of the things from my kids' childhood. Like, I always say, no, like, let's sit in that for a little while and wrestle with what are the reasons why this is hard for me to get rid of? What are the emotions that are coming up? And then, are they healthy or are they unhealthy motivations? Because it can be hard. It's not just hard physical work. It can be hard emotional and mental work as well. And decluttering can bring up a lot of difficult questions about, well, what am I going to find when I get rid of everything that has defined who I am? What am I going to be motivated by if it's not to spend my money on buying stuff? But I think those are good questions that we need to ask ourselves, as opposed to just saying this is too hard.
I agree. And I also, one of the things, and it made me think of it when you were telling your story about June, is sometimes I find, and I don't work as much in homes with people as I used to when I first started my business, but one of the key things that I would hear from clients without even me intentionally thinking about it until they pointed it out, was sometimes people just need permission, because they doubt themselves. Am I going to be making a mistake? Am I going to regret this? Am I a bad, am I a bad mom for getting rid of my kids' stuff? Or am I unappreciative if somebody gave me this gift that I really don't like and I'm holding on to it? All these things. And just having somebody, and in this case, it was me, giving them permission that it's okay to get rid of it. This isn't serving you anymore. We can now donate it, whatever, to somebody else who can, just free to weight off of them. And so whether you're working one-on-one, I would say, or challenge any of our listeners out there, whether you're working one-on-one or you're reading one of Joshua's books or his blog or listening to this podcast, there's ways that if you are having like some self-doubt, I think it is important to kind of challenge and kind of push yourself outside your comfort zone, because if we, like you said, have grown up in a house where you always held on to things, you didn't get rid of things, that's your norm. Just like your kids have grown up in a house where you don't have excess stuff. And so have my kids, and that's their norm.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Giving permission, or I find sometimes just thinking about things differently in a different way. Someone says something that you hadn't thought before. Yeah, I mean, all that baby stuff that you're holding on to in the basement. I mean, that was a wonderful time of your life, but I mean, there's probably some young mom right now that needs those very things and can be creating the same memories with their child. Oh yeah, I never thought of it. I never thought of it that way. Or I always try to challenge yeah, but what if I get rid of something and I end up needing it sometime down the road? I always try to challenge that thinking by saying, yeah, but what if you hold on to all this stuff and you never need it down the road? Like there's a flip side to it's not all gain to keep
right.
things because I might need it someday. There's a cost in holding on to all these things. And maybe I get rid of 500 things and I ended up needing one of them at some point down the road. Well, maybe that's an okay cost to pay as opposed to holding on to 500 things for the rest of your life that you never actually end up using.
Totally. And I always challenge people in addition to what you just said and saying, okay, so let's go down that road. Like, let's see it through. So what if you do need it? How quickly could you replace it? Could you replace it? Could you borrow it? Like, is it something that like, oh, I want to sell it or get rid of it or whatever. Like, if you are hiring somebody to do your lawn and you've been hiring someone for the past 5 years to do your lawn, do you need a lawnmower? Like, maybe you get rid of it. What if I decide I want to one day do it? Okay. Well,
Yeah.
could you afford to, so sometimes I think it's healthy to have those, like, let's see it through. Let's play the game and go down the road of, okay, let's say that you get rid of it in one time. You're like, would it be catastrophic? And
I always I love telling my folding table story. We hardly ever use our folding table and chairs. And so we got rid of them when we were in Vermont. And then we moved here to Arizona, and Halloween is like a beautiful evening here in Arizona where everyone hangs out in their driveway. And I grew up in South Dakota where everyone's bundled up and it's cold to even open the door to hand out the treats. But everyone here hangs out in their driveway and they have like big block parties and all the kids come by, and it's a totally different experience. I love it. But anyway, we decided we were going to host like our neighbors in our driveway on Halloween. And it was like, oh, it'd be nice to have that folding table that we got rid of 3 years ago. Oh, now we need that folding table for the first time in 3 years. And literally I called my neighbor and we had one in like 20 seconds. I'm just like, well, I'll just call our neighbor, see if they have one we can borrow. And lo and behold, we've borrowed it every year for the last
I love
6 years.
It's so funny, Josh, seriously, I have a very similar story. So we just hosted last week, at the time of this recording, it was Labor Day. So one of my neighbors said a couple months ago at the beginning of the summer, we should have like an end of summer Labor Day. I live in a neighborhood party, like a block party. There's a lot of people that moved into our neighborhood during COVID. We're OGs. We've been in our neighborhood for like 20 years, but it's like turning over.
Yeah.
And because I'm the planner and organizer, like, Lori, can you plan a block party? So lo and behold, I planned a block party. We had a food truck. My neighbor's a DJ. He DJ'd. It was great. It was like low key, but it was awesome. We had like 130 people. Now, here's the thing. I have one folding table. Okay, I lie. I have a 6 foot folding table, and then we have an old card table, and we do use them. So we have them. That's it. We have 2 good friends who both have big tents. One of our friends has a ton of folding tables. So we borrowed all that stuff, and people are coming up to me going, did you rent all this? Did you do this? Do you have all this? Where do you store this? And I'm like, no, I just asked my friends. I asked my neighbors. I pulled it together because for the once a year that we do this, I don't need to have all of it. And people are happy to do it because you all know if you have something, you want it to get used. You don't want to just sit there collecting dust. And if I had to go out and buy all that stuff, not only would it be a waste of money, but then I would have had to store all of it. And I don't have the space for that. So it's so true, but it doesn't mean if you don't have the stuff, it has to stop you from doing the thing. I think that's really the point of what I'm saying. Like, you could easily said, well, we can't host because we don't have a table, but you're like, no, let's figure out how we can do a both and I love that.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
So true.
Talk about your book. I want to talk about your book. Well, I mean, there's a lot of books out there, but let's talk about your most recent book, Things That Matter.
Things That Matter, Overcoming Distraction to Pursue a More Meaningful Life. I wrote 2 books on minimalism, The More of Less, which is really the why of minimalism, why it's important, what it frees us up to do. And then The Minimalist Home is really the how. It's a room by room guide to a decluttered, refocused life. I think I go through like 13 different spaces in the home and how to declutter them. So I'd written those 2 books about minimalism. And I thought I was going to be done writing books. I don't necessarily love writing books. I like blog posts, but books I find really difficult, which apparently everybody does. So that makes me feel better.
Yes,
but
I'm like,
anyway,
I don't like
but I used to do this. I used to do a weekend retreat up in pre-COVID up in Northern California. And I would have 4 sessions. We would talk about minimalism. We would talk about how to do it. We would talk about overcoming consumerism. And then my Sunday morning talk was always about, let's extend this conversation beyond the physical possessions that keep us from living a meaningful life. And let's talk about some of the other pursuits that can keep us from the most important things. And so I would talk about the pursuit of money. I would talk about the pursuit of accolades. I would talk about the distraction of technology, the distraction of leisure. And I would, there's about 5 or 6 different topics that I would say, let's just talk about other distractions besides minimalism. So anyway, that finished on a Sunday night, on a Sunday morning. Monday night, I was at a conference here in Phoenix, and Charlie Gilkey had just written a book called Start Finishing. And as a part of this conference, he said, I want you to close your eyes and answer this question. If you were to die today, what is the one project in life you would most regret not finishing? And I immediately thought, it was funny because there was an artist talking about an art project. There was a mom talking about preparing her kids for life. But for me, I thought to myself, I would really regret not taking that Sunday morning conversation and putting it into a book in some way that it could outlive me. And so that was the birth of Things That Matter, Overcoming Distraction to Pursue a More Meaningful Life. I think in a lot of ways it takes the principles of minimalism and extends it to other topics and other issues and other distractions that keep us from meaning and fulfillment.
I love that. And of course, for all our listeners, if you're a new listener, we'll link up to all of this in our show notes and on our podcast page. So we'll have all ways to connect up with Joshua and all of his amazing stuff. I want to touch for a second, because I think part of the benefits, right, I would assume, of living with less and having the stuff that really matters is that it does free up your time to do things that are important to you outside of, the obvious. And you have this nonprofit, and I'd love to learn a little bit about it, because philanthropy is a big thing in our personal life, and we do a lot. Service is something that we live. It's a value in our family. And I love to share those types of messages with our audience. So can you just talk a little bit about how that came about, what it is, give us some insight and how that fits into your life?
Yeah, thanks. I appreciate that. The nonprofit is called The Hope Effect. And we launched it in 2016, although we started in 2015 having conversations about what it would become. And it is a direct result of minimalism in my life. I started writing about minimalism. I started the blog. It eventually grew and grew, and so transitioned into writing and speaking full time. When we were approached by an agent about writing a book about minimalism, we pitched the book to 10 publishers, and 9 of them made offers on the book. And I asked my agent, I said, what do we do now? And he said, well, we just let them bid against each other to see
That's a
who
good problem to
wants it the,
have,
who wants
Joshua.
it the most. Yeah. And it became pretty clear pretty early that I would get paid well to write a book about not buying stuff, which was an interesting place to be. And so I remember it was an evening. I sat down on the couch with Kim, and I said, I think that we have to decide right now if we really believe everything we're saying. It's one thing to live a minimalist life when you're getting by on a modest income. It's something very different when you have a lot of money coming in out of nowhere. And like, do we want the fancy cars? Do we want the bigger house? Do we want the new furniture and the bigger screen television? Or do we really believe everything we're saying, that there's more important things in life than physical possessions? And we, of course, agreed right away that we meant everything that we'd been saying and that we had experienced in our own life. And so we took the money from the book project, because our income was covering we didn't need much to get by. When you don't own much, you don't need much to get by. And so we used the money from the books to start the nonprofit, The Hope Effect. And a long story as to how we got into the work that we're doing, but the work is we are working to change the way the world cares for orphans. We have had decades worth of research that children who grow up in orphanages suffer developmentally in almost every imaginable way. 20 times more likely to end up homeless, 50 times more likely to end up in sex trade, like 200 times more likely to commit suicide, just because brains don't develop the same way when there's a whole bunch of cribs in a room and a couple adults coming in and out on different shifts. Like, it's better than growing up on the streets, but it's not the same as the attention and affection that you get when you grow up in a family. And so most developed nations know this. And so in the US, we have the foster care system, and in most developed nations, we've kind of moved towards a foster care system rather than institutional orphanages. But in underdeveloped nations, this is still the main way that they care for orphan children. And like we say, there's 90 million orphan children in the world, and less than 1% will get adopted on any given year. And so how we care for the rest matters. And so we're in Mexico, in Thailand, Honduras. We're moving into Cambodia this fall, and we work to change laws. We work to raise up families who will bring these children into their homes, as opposed to them being raised in an institution.
Well, I love it. It's meaningful, important work, and equally as important that we share light on it. So thank you for walking through that. And I will make sure to include a link to that for anybody that wants to learn more, get involved, support your mission. So thank you. And I can only, well, obviously, because it was birthed from the proceeds that you earn, but aside from the monetary aspect of it, I know in our life as well, we having time and setting those boundaries and not having the physical stuff to cloud you and not spending the money on the unnecessary physical stuff gives you the opportunity to be able to support, whether that's supporting with money, whether that's supporting with time, whether that's supporting however you can in your world. And so I know for me, this is my little soapbox, but as I, encourage people to reduce clutter, live, and again, I'm not telling you have to live a minimalist life, but have stuff that matters in your world. Think about, again, the why and the other things that you could do with that time, with that money, with all of those things. So thank you for, continuing to do good in the world. Joshua Becker, we really appreciate you. Before we go, we're going to take one quick break and then put you back in the hot seat. Tell our listeners what's the best place for them to go to find you, connect up, learn more, all the things.
Yes, home base for me is becoming minimalist.com. It's always been my home base online, and I'm plenty involved in a lot of different things. The books, and we publish a couple magazines, and
We didn't even talk about the magazines.
yeah,
You want to throw something out about the magazines? You do so many things that I can't even keep up. Talk about the magazines real quick.
Yeah, I love Simplify magazine was the first one. It was a friend of mine, Brian Gardner, and we launched it together. It was great because I'd been writing long enough and online long enough that I developed a lot of relationships with like really amazing people who are writing about really amazing things and had incredible expertise in areas that I didn't have. And so the magazine became a place where I could pull in some of those experts and highlight some of their writing. A lot of people that people already know, but also new people who I discovered, who I'd met, who are doing amazing things. So anyway, it's a digital magazine. We come out with 4 issues a year, and each issue is focused on a specific topic. And then we have 8 or 10 experts that write about that given topic for each issue. And I think we're the only magazine in the world, but we do $20 lifetime subscriptions. So there's no reoccurring charge. It's online. You can download it to read on your mobile device, or you can read online. And so we don't have printing and shipping charges, and
we don't need that. We don't need that physical clutter. We don't need that anymore.
As long as we can pay writers and editors and designers, then we make do. So anyway, but becomingminimalist.com is home base, and you can find anything, the YouTube channel and the social media feeds and the Hope Effect, and we created an app a few years ago. And so anyway,
you've got all the things.
You can find it all from there.
We'll go there. And if you ever need a writer, I'm sure you have a robust roster. If you ever need anything, hit me up. I'm all about it. All right, we're going to take one quick break. We come back, going to just wrap things up with putting you back in the hot seat. So sit tight. Okay, Joshua. So we always like to ask our guests a few questions. Now, clearly you're inspirational to many, many people. I'm a book reader. I love books. So I ask this question somewhat selfishly as well as for our listeners out there. But is there a book, and I'm sure there's many, but a particular book, and it could be something current, it could be something old, that has either been a transformational or something that you go back to on the reg, that you want to share with our listeners as something that is a must read?
I'm going to mention 2 because not everyone might love the first one, but maybe the book that has been more influential in my life concerning money, possessions, is a book called Money, Possessions, and Eternity by Randy Alcorn. And he's a bit of a theologian. And so it's a very religious, Christian-based book, which of course is
I'm totally buying that. Me.
So
I'm all in on that.
So Money, Possessions, and Eternity, super influential. 10 years old or so, there's a book by Dave Bruno called The 100 Thing Challenge.
Okay.
And when I was just starting out writing about minimalism, he was one of the guys that was somewhat writing about it, but it was very specific. He was trying to get down to 100 things. He had 2 daughters, lived in San Diego as a professor, and he was trying to get his personal list down to 100 things. And like Newsweek picked up the story way back when. And I've always been kind of inspired by his approach, even though I never wanted to own just 100 things. I never wanted to count the things that I owned. I'm very inspired by people who do that because I tend to be very much, well, if he can own just 100 things, then certainly I can get rid of some of the Tupperware in my cupboard. Like if there's people living in 200 square foot homes, certainly we can downsize to 1,400 square feet. Like it's just, if they can do it, if they can do that extreme, then certainly I don't need as much as I need. And so it's always really helped break some of the assumptions that I have in my life.
I love it. And I do. And I think it's great. I love reading other people's books that have a slightly different approach, right? Under the same kind of umbrella. And that's what I love about this whole industry, whether it's organization, minimalism, is again, there is such a spectrum of approaches. And to me, whether you're somebody that, you know, is all about Marie Kondo, or somebody that's all about the home edit, or somebody that's all about, you know, minimalism, or whatever your lane is, it's about intentionality. And I think that's really what the most important thing is, being intentional with, again, like you said, your stuff, your time, your money, all the things. Yeah. Personally, this has been so wonderful for me to get a chance to sit down and have a chat with you out there, everybody. I hope that you guys enjoyed this conversation as much as I do. Joshua, thank you again so much. If this is your first time tuning into our show, welcome. Make sure you click the subscribe, follow button wherever you are. If you're watching us on YouTube, make sure that you check out our catalog. We've got over 300 episodes of all kinds of amazing guests and topics with people that are inspiring and way smarter than me. And I encourage you to go and just check them out. And if you have questions for us, you can always shoot us an email or message. We're everywhere at This Organized Life Podcast. So until next week, I'm Lori Palau. Peace out. Thanks for tuning in. If you like this episode, please spread the love and share it with your friends. And if this is your first time joining us, make sure to click the subscribe button wherever you are listening so you never miss an episode. And while you're there, please leave us a review so other people know that our show is worth the listen. You can also find us on YouTube and Instagram at This Organized Life Podcast. And if you'd like to connect with us, you can head on over to our website at simply the letter B like boy organized.com, which is filled with tons of resources, including free downloads, checklists, links to our amazing organizing partners, and all of our digital offerings. I'll see you next week for another episode of This Organized Life.